Right. So, and then I can do a formal welcome to everybody for coming along to this, May session of the Bookselling Research Network's talk series. We are really delighted to welcome Michael Robb this afternoon. Thank you, Michael, for coming. We were just discussing before everybody arrived that Michael has been doing quite a lot of these talks. He's a very popular speaker at the moment, lots of bookshops around the UK, including Blackwell's in Oxford this week. And he was interviewed by no less than Martin Latham. So I'm quite sad that I wasn't there. That was quite a dream team. But here is Michael's book, Shelf Life. The background, so Michael used to run a bookshop in Essex for over 20 years. And then he transitioned into publishing. So he's been in publishing sales, working for companies like Harville, Taschen, Turnaround, and at the moment, if this is correct, Michael GMC.
That is
So he's
correct.
got a huge experience in the book trade world. And this does give him a very useful and valuable set of perspectives about what's happening. So the book has been getting rave reviews, as we posted two of them, I think, up on the BRN website. So people like Adam Smith and Sarah Harkness have both said how valuable it is. So it doesn't just need me to say how much I enjoyed it. But Michael, we're going to hand over to you for about half an hour to talk to us about the book and about what you found out. And then we'll open it up for questions, which Eben is going to chair. So meanwhile, if you've got any questions you want to ask or for Eben to pick up, please do post them in the chat. But otherwise, Michael, I will hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam, and very nice to see you all. Thank you all for coming, and thanks for that lovely welcome. As Sam said, I'm Michael, and I'm the author of Shelf Life. Let me just share my screen here, which I hope you can all see. Let's see if we'll do that. Yeah. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah. That's fine.
Brilliant. Yeah. So this is the book I've written, Shelf Life, a journey through the past, present and future of bookselling and publishing in Britain, published a couple of months ago by the History Press. Shelf Life is a book that covers 2,000 years of book trade history, but it's got a particular focus on the multiple changes that have happened to our industry over the past 4 decades. And it also tries to look at what's on, lies ahead on the road ahead, if you like, as well. I'm going to talk a bit about certain parts of the book, just to give you a flavour of the roller coaster ride that the book trade has been on in recent decades and arguably is still undergoing. And as Sam said, there'll be plenty of opportunity at the end to ask questions. I'm really keen to hear your thoughts and comments. Just to give you a bit of background about me, some of which Sam just said, I set up a small independent bookshop called Robb's Bookshop in Chelmsford in Essex in England with my father back in the early 1980s, and the bookshop ran successfully for 2 decades. My wife Kathleen later joined us in running the business as well. Our shop subsequently closed in February 2000, 25 years ago, goodness. And my father Peter since retired, and both Kathleen and I at that point transferred to jobs in book publishing, and we're both in sales in book publishing. Some of that is in the book, but it's important to say that Shelf Life is not really about my shop, and it's not really about me. Some of my experience does feature in the book, including some of the Robb's Bookshop story, but really just used as examples of the changes that have happened to the wider trade over the past 40 years. So, hang on. There you go. That was my shop back in 1984 when it was just about to open. And it looks of its time, I would say. We opened our shop on Friday the 3rd of February 1984, and both that opening day and the Saturday that followed were a huge success. Now, it's important to remember that Britain in the early 1980s was a very different world. No internet, no mobile phones, iPads or laptops. And, as those of you who work in this industry will know, all UK retailers had to sell books at the same fixed retail price at that point, due to a century-old piece of legislation called the Net Book Agreement. That was a feature in the local paper, which itself also looked dated, and there's me looking quite young in that very faded picture with my dad there. So opening a new bookshop was incredibly exciting, and I talk about this experience in the book. I still say that, you know, starting a bookshop and running a bookshop is the best job I've ever had in my life, without a doubt. Our bookshop quickly started to develop a separate character of its own, becoming almost like a living thing grown from our original vision. So we'd sort of created this public space legally owned by us, but in reality belonging to the whole town. And it was really gratifying to see customers acting as if they were part of the operation and having a stake in the business. And I sort of think that's how, you know, that's a measure of a successful bookshop. We successfully ran Robb's Bookshop throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Everybody looks quite smart in this picture. I don't think that's just because of the time, but this was an evening where we'd invited customers in and were giving them drinks. That's why some of them look a bit dressed up. I think you can just about see the wine in the background. But although we were successful, change was happening to the book trade, and sort of unbeknownst to us when we first opened our shop. And that change eventually came knocking at our door. And we were sadly forced to close our shop in early 2000 due to competition from two big national chains that had opened very large bookshops in Chelmsford High Street. And these were Ottakers, if some of you remember them, and then Waterstones. For a while, we tried to hold out against them, but in reality, we sort of knew what the outcome would be. Our business was just too small to compete. And this is what happened. We had to close, traumatic as it was at the time. This sort of brings me on to identifying what the huge changes are that have happened to the book trade during the past 4 decades, all of which are at the very core of my book. And many of you here will have lived through these changes just as I have. My contention is that retail and bookselling in particular always has changed. There's always change. That's in the nature of the business. But I would argue that the past 4 or 5 decades have seen greater change than all the past 2,000 years before that added together. Now, the first of these changes was the thing that affected us more than anything, and that was the rapid growth of large national bookshop chains. It's difficult to imagine now, but both Waterstones and Dillons, identified in this picture, were really only just getting started when we opened our bookshop in the early 1980s. But by the late 1980s, they were in full expansion mode, to be joined later in the next decade by Ottakers, there on bottom left, and the big American chain Borders. Now, Tim Waterstone, I talk a lot about him in the book, had a vision of larger, well-stocked bookshops. He opened hundreds of such shops across the land, and he transformed and dramatically improved the book-selling offer on our high streets. Tim Waterstone was a book lover. He loved books and bookshops, but he felt that the country deserved better bookshops with better selection, more stock, and more knowledgeable staff. Both him and Terry Marr, who was the head of Dillons, were actually quite scathing about the state of independent bookshops at that time. The sleepy, old-fashioned business that I joined in 1984 probably did need a considerable kick up the backside. In many ways, the trade had barely changed in the decades since the Second World War. It urgently needed bringing up to date. And Tim Waterstone went on to transform the UK book industry, and Waterstone was then the largest book retailer in Europe. As a consequence, though, of the massive growth of chain bookshops, hundreds of long-established independent bookshops went out of business. We were one of them. Another big change around this time was the abolition of the net book agreement, which I alluded to earlier, and this was in the late 1990s, which ended fixed pricing on books, and that had been in place since 1900. This was brought about by intense campaigning by a number of publishers, but also was heavily supported by Terry Marr and the Dillons bookshop chain. Getting rid of fixed pricing opened up a wider market for books through heavy discounting, and there's no doubt it certainly brought cheaper books for the end consumer. But this in turn took many sales away from bookshops, both chain bookshops and independents, as supermarkets stepped in to cream off the best-selling titles. The next significant development, probably no surprise to many of you here, was down to one man, a certain Mr. Bezos, who had this plan for online bookselling. Now, this was obviously a truly seismic development that rocked the book trade to its very foundations. I would suspect many of us here don't really like Jeff Bezos, but we have to admit that he had an amazing business plan and an amazing vision. As a result, he not only upended the book trade, but he transformed the way that people shop around the globe, all of which I detail in the book. And he started a retail revolution that is still going on to this day. And I think we're still not done yet with that. Change is still happening. You only have to look at our high streets today to see how, we don't know what the future of shopping really is going to be. The book trade was still reeling from the assault of Amazon and trying to find ways to survive against this online retailer when it was then very nearly dealt a killer blow in the late 2000s with the next major change that I'd identify. And this was the advent of digital books or ebooks, possibly signaling the end of the print book itself. Anybody who works in this industry will probably remember the feeling of impending doom that was hanging over the book industry around sort of 2010 as digital book sales grew rapidly. So all of those things, a lot of change in a very short period for this once very traditional industry. As a result of these changes through several tumultuous decades, over 1,000 independent bookshops closed in Britain. But actually then a similar fate befell many of their competitors. Hundreds of chain bookshops closed as book sales increasingly moved to online retailers or over to the digital medium. One book chain after another collapsed. Dillons and Ottakers were eventually absorbed into the Waterstones brand, but closing hundreds of stores as it happened. And the big American chain Borders went bust on both sides of the Atlantic. So, the book trade has experienced massive change over the past 4 decades. And having lived and worked closely through all these changes, I wanted to try to understand them better. Probably also, I turned 60 and was getting a bit reflective. And I thought maybe it was important to document these changes and to try to put them into some sort of historical context. And then maybe try to assess where the trade goes from here. And so to achieve this, Shelf Life is divided into 3 sections. The first part of the book looks at 2,000 years of book trade history, sort of putting things into perspective and saying that, there's always been change and, the trade has adapted through all these times. The second part covers those changes I've just outlined over recent decades. And that section includes a bit more of my own personal experience in it. And then the third part of the book looks at the state of the book trade now and asks what lies ahead. And for that section, I interviewed a number of other people working within the industry to pull together a range of views. So it wasn't just me talking all my opinions. The final section of the book talks about how, good news, in the past 5 years, we've witnessed a really welcome revival of our bricks and mortar bookshops. And this has happened on both sides of the Atlantic. Since the pandemic, in the UK, between 40 and 50 new independent bookshops have opened in Britain every year. Now, obviously, some have closed at the same time, but new bookshops opening is good news. And there seems to be a sort of new energy emanating from these bookshops too. Amongst their ranks, it's really encouraging when you look at the growth of several mini chains. Some of you will know Toppings, who started out in Ely, but now has branches in Bath, St Andrews, Edinburgh, and is opening in York later this year as well. Rossiter Books, who have 6 bookshops on the English-Welsh borders. This all suggests to me that bookshops are succeeding when only a few years back things were looking increasingly tough. Waterstones, under the management of James Dawn, is also doing well. It's got over 270 bookshops nationwide, and Dawn has managed to repurpose the chain to survive and actually thrive in the Amazon age. Waterstones is no longer the range bookseller that Tim Waterstone wanted it to be. That crown belongs to Amazon today, and all bookshops have sort of had to adapt to this new reality. But the best bookshops now are open long hours. They often have cafes or even bars, such as Book Bar in London, which is just opening its second shop. They're hosting a multitude of author events, book clubs, quizzes, game nights, and they're offering a destination and an experience. And it seems readers really want bookshops where they can talk to people, discover new authors, be surrounded by a curated selection of books. And publishers have stepped up to the plate and played their part in this revival too, producing more beautiful, better designed books, working with booksellers to publish unique editions that have helped bring customers back to bookshops again. Recent years have also seen Harry Potter style midnight openings to launch new books by authors such as Sally Rooney and best-selling romantasy authors Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros. This is all part of the in-person excitement generated by physical bookshops, and online retailers just can't compete with that human interaction. In a way, I think bookshops have sort of hit upon a magic formula that still attracts customers into physical retail outlets, what is being called experiential bookselling, giving customers a reason to visit shops beyond the basic financial transaction, has proved hugely successful. It's really pumped new blood into our bookshops, but actually could be an answer to problems facing many other high street retailers too. In a world increasingly dominated by the digital, I think it's encouraging to see readers desiring this human interaction, turning their backs on buying online and delighting in the very traditional habit of spending time in bookshops. For book lovers, bookshops have become a favoured destination once more, a venue for life-enriching events. To me, after what happened to our bookshop and hundreds of other independent bookshops, it's really heartening to see great new bookshops opening across the UK in recent years. And whilst there's nowhere near as many independent bookshops today as there were 40 years ago, I think you're seeing really innovative and exciting bookshops. And it feels like this is a really strong revival of the bookshop sector. And yet, just as things, I don't want to be too doom and gloom here, but just as things appear to be settling down, I think there's more trouble on the horizon, prompting renewed questions about the future of books and bookshops. And I touch upon this towards the end of Shelf Life, looking at two major problems facing the book trade in the years ahead. And please try and bear in mind, I think I'm an optimist. Okay. So one is the future of reading itself. And we'll talk about that in a second. And the second are questions raised by technology and AI in particular. Both of these subjects are currently getting a lot of coverage in the trade press. Let's look at the future of reading, which underpins this trade, but actually it goes much wider than that. In its latest annual survey in 2024, the National Literary Trust reported that just 1 in 3 children and young people aged between 8 and 18 say that they enjoyed reading in their free time. Now, you may think, okay, that's sort of pretty standard, but that's actually the lowest level since the National Literacy Trust started asking this question in 2005. Reading for enjoyment also was weakest for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Another report from the Reading Agency also reported that half of UK adults don't read regularly, and almost 1 in 4 young people aged 16 to 24 say they've never been regular readers. Added to this, the National Literacy Trust estimates that nearly 1 million children in the UK do not own a book of their own. And since 2010, added onto this, over 800 libraries have closed in the UK. And I would say our spending in this area is woefully behind most of our European neighbours. I'm not meaning to be a prophet of doom, more a realist. I think if we recognise a problem, we can start to address it. And it's worth noting, UK book sales in both 2023 and 2024 showed a year-on-year decline in the number of books sold. We all know that in modern 21st century society, there are more reasons than ever not to pick up a book. Multiple podcasts, radio shows, TV channels, online streaming services, cinema, the internet, social media sites, YouTube, doom scrolling, gaming. All of these seem to occupy an increasing amount of our daily lives. And a recent YouGov poll confirmed that 40% of Britons have not read a book in the past year. People are now reading less, and when they do read, they're reading shorter works as well. We should be concerned, excuse me, we should be concerned about our descendants' literacy levels and ability to read. But even if we teach children to read, if future generations grow up without a reading habit, what impact will this have on wider society, on our culture? Never mind the book trade. Books aid imagination, creativity, empathy. Their stories and learning underpin our lives and culture, arguably forging more rounded members of society. If we believe in this, if we believe in the long-form book and are concerned about its future, if we care about books and bookshops, what can we do? Can we turn back the tide? And I'll be interested to hear what you have to say later. A part of the answer, though, may come from within the book industry itself, which is rightly concerned about these statistics. Now, the book trade and I talk about this in the book, has never simply been about making money. And this is a theme that runs throughout shelf life. Most of those involved in book selling and publishing over the centuries have been united in the goal, first and foremost, to altruistically share their love of books with others. I think people come into the business because they want to work with books, but they also want to share that love of books. And then they want to try and make money out of it. Most who work in the book business do so because they're passionate about books and they understand the good that they can deliver to readers and the knock-on effects for society as a whole. Much of this is reflected in the first part of the book, which provides a sort of whistle-stop tour through 2,000 years of book trade history. So, you know, this altruistic ethos dates right back to William Caxton, seen here with his printing press in the 15th century. He was a lover of literature, wanting to publish and share great works. By introducing the first printing press, Caxton, into Britain, Caxton created a way to produce cheaper books and to widen the range of books being published. And in doing so, he helped expand the book market, opening up the wonders that books can deliver to a larger readership. This idea has been carried forward by countless others over the centuries, such as the revolutionary 18th century bookseller James Lackington. Lackington, some of you may have heard of, came from a poor background, only learned to read in his early 20s, but was so overjoyed by his discovery of books that he wanted to share this with others, selling books as cheaply as possible to reach more potential readers. His huge Temple of the Muses bookshop in Finsbury Square, featured here in this picture here in London, was a testament to this ambition. And then in the 19th century, Charles Edward Moody offered cheap subscriptions to his circulating libraries in another bid to reach more readers. The massive success of his business enabled thousands of new readers to discover the wonders of literature. In the early 20th century, Joseph Mallaby Dent discovered a love of books at the age of 15, reading Boswell's Life of Johnson through his local Mutual Improvement Society. Dent went on to become a publisher, saying that books have been the great solace and help of my life. He published inexpensive pocket editions of Shakespeare, and in 1905 launched the Everyman's Library, still going today, as you know, aiming to create a vast series of affordable world literature accessible to all classes. Likewise, Alan Lane introduced cheap Penguin paperbacks in the 1930s with the same goal. A man who may be poor in money is not necessarily poor in intellectual qualities, he said. Later in the 20th century, Tim Waterstone, Terry Marr of Dillon's say similar things, and they wanted to grow book sales and find more readers. So the book trade then has always possessed this altruistic streak alongside its business aims, and I think that remains the case today. The book trade has to find ways to continue to make books relevant for future generations. And encouragingly, there are many within the industry not only concerned about the current decline in reading, but equally determined to act to reverse this worrying trend and to ensure that future generations read and love books. And this has to start with children. So the Great School Libraries campaign, first and foremost, not directly to do with bookselling, is a joint initiative of the School Library Association, the Chartered Institute of Information Professionals, and the School Libraries Group, aiming to bring back libraries and access to librarians in every school in the UK. This is supported by many of our leading children's authors, people like Philip Pullman, Michael Morpurgo, and Julia Donaldson, who describe school libraries as beneficial to education and to society as a whole, narrowing the gap in aspiration and ability in children. The Publishers Association, PA, is also supporting this campaign. On becoming PA president in 2024, Parminder Mann, who's now moved on from that role, is CEO of Simon & Schuster, called on governments to support libraries, saying, we should have one in every school. We should have one in every town. These should be shared assets where anybody can reach for the shelves and alter the course of their lives forever. And from the book trade, the world's largest publisher, Penguin Random House, is also playing a major role in this campaign. So far, it has supplied hundreds of schools each with 400 Puffin books and 100 books from other publishers completely free of charge to improve or instigate their library provision. Now, this is brilliant. It's a welcome move from the UK's leading publisher, but also demonstrates yet again the altruistic motives behind many participants in this industry. Waterstones supports the Children's Laureates campaign. Laureates campaign in association with the charity Book Trust. And as many of you I'm sure know, the Children's Laureate is a key children's author who acts as an ambassador for books, promoting the value of books to educators and to government, and as well as through the media. Accepting the role in 2024, Frank Cottrell Boyce said, "I write children's books because I think they help build the apparatus of happiness inside us. I'm going to do everything in my power to get reading as a right for all into the national conversation." And I think most of you who follow the trade press will see that he's currently doing an amazing job, working incredibly hard in this endeavour. Many of our bookshops, Waterstones and Independents, run story times, children's book clubs and other events for youngsters to ensure they have access to books and to encourage the reading habit. All well and good for those who are taking their children into shops, but bookshops also often work closely with children's book publishers to ensure that books are available to all and that authors can engage with young readers in schools as well, and are taking authors into school. The World Book Day charity, which works with the book trade, encourages more children and families to find fun and enjoyment in reading, because they know that reading for pleasure changes lives. Now, World Book Day reported this year that 25% of children receiving free school meals said that the £1 book they bought with their World Book token was often the first book of their own. Charities such as Book Trust are working hard to change this, to get more preschool children reading, with a particular emphasis on low-income households. And I think you'll have seen Book Trust released the Reading Rights Report this week saying that. And you may have also seen in the trade press that the Publishers Association itself recently launched a report into helping boost children's enjoyment of reading. Part of the plan is encouraging national government to get involved by collecting data on children's reading, then by improving school library provision, as we were talking about, and making time in the national curriculum for reading for pleasure, not connecting reading for some work that's got to be done, just having fun with reading. Now, there are certainly some MPs and members of the Lords that are backing this initiative, but I would say that I think in recent decades, the UK government has been woefully hands-off in this area. And this seeming lack of interest and lack of engagement is itself, I think, part of the problem. If government isn't actively supporting initiatives to get children reading, there's little doubt that such campaigns face an uphill struggle. But as I say, people like the PA, Frank Cottrell Boyce, others are definitely petitioning government, working with them, to try and change this. In other European countries, in addition to better funding for school libraries, I think you'll see governments supporting reading and culture in much more strident fashion than here. Both France and Germany protect their bookshops with similar measures to our now defunct netbook agreement, and they have a lot more bookshops as a result. The French government also supports its independent bookshops with interest-free loans, for example. And across Europe, several countries, including France, Germany, and Italy, give culture vouchers to young people to encourage them to spend money on books and the arts generally. These governments are recognising the importance of books for the cultural good of society, and they're supporting them accordingly. So getting government on side is vital, alongside the other efforts already being made. So the trade is doing something. There are good things happening, but clearly more initiatives will be required, and more people and more organisations will need to be involved if reading levels are to improve and books are to have a chance of surviving. What other obstacles lay ahead, only time can tell. But from where we are at this juncture, I think it's very difficult to predict outcomes. And who knows what technological developments will, come along in the next few years, if you like. If we value our bookshops and we believe in the power of the book, we all need to get involved, I think, to secure a better future for this much-loved trade and everything it stands for. The book trade wields a huge responsibility, and I think every one of us needs to join this fight in some way or other. So shelf life is not just a history of the British book trade. It's also a call to action on many issues currently facing the trade, including, that big one there, how to get more people reading. And the last section of the book, as I alluded to, I also look at that other big issue of the day, and I'm not going to talk much about it here, the impact of AI. This has obviously dominated both the trade press and the national press since my book went to print at the end of last year. I do talk about it a bit, but every day there's something new. there are two strands, I think, that most concern us. First, obviously, the breach of copyright from the tech companies, a subject yet again where our government is being woefully inadequate and unable to see the bigger picture. This is still ongoing, as we know, and many groups within the industry, led by the PA and Society of Authors, amongst others, are campaigning to stop tech companies breaching copyright and just stealing writers' work to train their AI. The book trade, obviously, is rightly arguing that tech companies, yes, you can have access to our work, but I think you need to ask and you need to pay for it, like everybody else. And secondly, I think there's a more ongoing concern about books created by AI flooding the market. My feeling is that the majority of us and the majority of readers want to read books created by our fellow humans and don't have much desire to be served up some derivative lesser product created by AI, but that's just my opinion. In similar vein, I'm concerned about the recent announcement from Audible this week that's given the green light to producing audiobooks read by AI and possibly translated by AI. Surely readers deserve better than this. We have such wonderful books. Why do we want to offer a cheap and nasty low-grade product instead? Again, my opinion. One thing I think we can all do is support our physical bookshops more. As Sam said, I've been to a few bookshops to talk about this book. And I think most of us here love going into bookshops. There's always conversations to be had in bookshops about books. Buying books from a bookshop for a real person sometimes takes a bit more effort, but you'll enjoy that book all the more knowing that you're supporting your local bookshop at the same time. I realise I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but we can all do in our daily lives as well as in our jobs to extol the wonders of books and help the cause. So Shelf Life is a sort of celebration of the book trade, its ups and downs and the roller coaster ride it's ridden over the years, and particularly in those recent decades. And it doesn't ignore its failings or its shortcomings either. There's plenty more in the book about the history of bookselling and publishing that I could talk about, but there's only so much we can cover in this section. The book tries to cover much of this, but it doesn't have all the answers. It's sort of, it's more seeking to get readers thinking about and discussing these issues. I try to make the point in the book that I'm just one of approximately 84,000 people currently working in the British book trade. I'm a small cog in this mammoth machine. And in this book, I'm trying to be an observer, if you like, and let others speak too. So perhaps that's a good moment to open this up to questions and comment from voices other than mine. So I've got to stop sharing at that point. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was great. A nice little overview of a lot of different subjects that are of interest to people in this group, I think. Does anyone want to open up any questions or? Simon, you're on mute.
Can't hear you, Simon. You're on
Can't hear
mute. Sorry.
There,
Can you hear me now?
that's better.
Yes.
So, enjoyable paper. You're right, I think. You're talking to the converted. I think we can all appreciate the pleasures of bookshops and can remember many occasions in the past where bookshops have been of critical importance. But I think, historically speaking, it's very difficult to establish how important bookshops were to the majority of people, because certainly in the past there were relatively few bookshops, and they were often rather frightening places for those who were not particularly literate. Thinking of the period I'm most interested in, which is Victorian and late 18th century period, most readers' experiences would not be of bookshops. They would probably be of a general store, possibly a grocery store, with just a single shelf of books, often used and reused. So getting to people who use bookshops is relatively easy. Getting to those who are reluctant to or frightened by or feel it has nothing to do with them, I think is a historical problem of considerable size. I mean, you're right about the impact of Caxton, but Caxton produced very expensive books, mostly directed to an audience in Westminster. You know, the success of printing came along with Lutheran pamphlets, cheap publications which people were fascinated by or engaged with, and were easily bought or borrowed and circulated. So historically speaking, we're dealing with a very small percentage of society. And
just to quickly interject two things. One, on the Caxton thing, I think you're right. I think my point more is he facilitated the ability to make cheaper books long term. He probably didn't himself, and you're right on that. And I'm sure you'll probably know more about that than me. But your other point is absolutely right, and I think really interesting. And I've obviously worked within the trade, so I'm prejudiced towards bookshops and like that to be. But there is a sort of ongoing balance in the trade of people who wanted to reach the people who weren't coming in bookshops, and that goes right through to the present day. And Terry Marr of Dillon's very much made this point. You know, he wanted to try and make bookshops more appealing to the sort of people who did think they were a bit snobby or a bit literary, and not very attractive to the general public. And I think that's still the case now. And you know, there definitely will be people. So, you know, much as some of us within the trade don't like the fact that supermarkets or Amazon sell books so cheaply, or even, you know, going back, people like the Book People or the Works or whatever, you can argue as well that actually that does democratize reading. It widens the book market. It gets other people who, you're absolutely right, if they're taking a book from the shelf of Tesco's but they're still buying a book, then that's a good thing. And I think I'm coming at it from a bit of a trade perspective. I absolutely agree. But you're right, there's always going to be people we won't reach through the book trade. So and I think both Tim Waterstone and Terry Marr wanted to try and make books. They very much slagged off independent bookshops in the 60s and 70s and said they were, you know, and I sort of have this impression from my childhood that they're often independent bookshops run by some curmudgeonly old character who frowned if you went anywhere near touching the books or something. And, you know, they talk about things, and I think they were building up all these urban myths about bookshops, that people who would turn the lights off when the customer left and only turn it on again when somebody came back in the shop, so not making it very welcoming, and ridiculously small opening hours and things like that. So they were trying to change that, and there are still people trying to change that. And I absolutely agree with you. It's not just about getting people into bookshops. Bookshops have a role, but I think, you know, people in publishing have a role as well, not always to sell their books through bookshops. Is how else can we get that? And that's why I was, you know, Penguin giving all those books to school, to, you know, start school libraries, basically. I think that's quite an amazing thing. Doesn't help bookshops at all, but actually it shows that the trade cares about, you know, how many people are reading books, if you like. So sorry, anyway, I interrupted you, Simon.
No, that's fine.
And just a follow-up comment on that, and apologies, this is kind of a UK centric, but I happened the other evening to want not something very intellectual to watch. There's a series on our BBC at the moment. Oh, maybe it's not BBC. Anyway, there's a series where a popular presenter called Alison Hammond, who's from Birmingham, goes and spends a weekend with another celebrity. And this particular episode I was watching, she was with the comedian Lenny Henry, who's also from Birmingham. And he was taking her around some of his favourite places. And one of the places he took Alison Hammond to was Hatchards in London.
Wow.
And on camera, she was visibly reluctant to go into the shop. And Lenny was saying, I come here all the time. It's brilliant. It's going to be fine. But there was a physical reaction to, I can't do this. And he had to sort of drag her in. Once she was in and he got her talking about Shakespeare, and didn't she not remember doing Othello at school, she started actually touching the books. But I just thought how fascinating to have that captured on camera, that physical reaction to, this is definitely not somewhere I want to be. So
No, and I think what you're alluding to, Simon, I think there are plenty of people who will enjoy books, but will feel the bookshop is not them, it's not their place. And I still think absolutely people feel that bookshops are for a certain, intellectual people, maybe whatever. And it's very difficult to fight against that because bookshop looks like a bookshop. I don't know if everybody else is. Will, you're running a bookshop, aren't you? So what do you think about it?
I was just thinking, most of our battle is trying to combat people's assumptions, I think, in that sense, in a nice bookish way, as well as we can. Last year we had a 6-foot cardboard cutout of Rick Astley greeting people in the bookshop for his autobiography coming out. That was it was more of a draw than anything that the shop had. That people were running in and singing next to it and then kind of forgetting where they were, which was a brilliant kind of theatricality that then suddenly they were kind of persuaded maybe they wanted to buy the book. But I was just wondering from our angle, the tension I seem to see now, both in the shop and I review books for the bookseller, and in both of those roles, is this kind of what someone had said to me, is it like fast fashion? The amount of books that are coming each week, that are turning around, so that I was thinking about your book today and thinking, oh, right, that was February. Now I'm thinking maybe I'm returning things that came out in January, and I'm thinking, this is a very strange world of timing and what actually is picky enough to stay on our shelves and the book we have. I don't know what you thought about that.
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, one, I was talking to somebody, trying to get somebody to review my book, and he was apologising, saying, "Oh no, sorry, that's not going to happen now because exactly you've passed that window where that book had come out." And I'm sort of thinking, but it's relevant. But I know this because obviously I work in this business just as you do, and I do, in the latter part of the book, I sort of talk about the title of the book, Shelf Life, and I sort of allude to the fact that my shop had a shelf life, but books have very much a shelf life that, in the sense we normally think of for food in a supermarket, that they are, it's lucky if books get on that shelf in the first place because so many books are published. So, I think it's actually thousands of books every week are released. It's ridiculous. And that includes all sorts of things that probably, won't go in a bookshop in the first place. But out of those, there are lots of authors who would love to see their books in bookshops, but don't. And even if they do, then how much visibility do they get? As you say, after 3 months, they are returnable. So, and there's been tons more books, and there will be loads more coming all the time. And yes, we probably publish too many books, but who's going to stop that as well? So it is a mad industry. I work for a publisher. We're publishing loads of books and distributing loads of books, and we're as guilty as anybody else. And no, I don't think any publisher is going to say, "Oh well, we'll stop. We'll let Penguin just keep." The number of books that Penguin and HarperCollins publish between them. I was talking to somebody from HarperCollins last year about this, about how many books she has to sell every month on their list. It's just ridiculous. So I don't know how they do justice to that and how they get them all placed. But then you, in your role, how do you do justice to it? And it's almost an impossible task, isn't it? But you're right. It is a slightly mad world to those coming from the outside. I like your Rick Astley thing. I was at the Gardeners Trade Show and saw Rick Astley. I don't know if you were there as well. And I saw various people posing with him and the cardboard cutout all at the same time. But I actually think there are bookshops doing things like quiz nights, games nights, all sorts of stuff, different things to try and break down that thing, and not just trying to sell them stuff, if you like. And maybe that's part of the answer. I think what Simon was sort of suggesting at the beginning, I think there's always going to be that. And I'm sure for you, getting people over the threshold into your shop in the first place is the biggest battle, because there's inevitably loads of people who won't go through the door, and you never know what that opportunity missed is. But yeah, I think bookshops are doing some interesting things, but there's always more you can do. And I think turning it into that event space, community space is part of that. And that definitely seems to be working. But how long have you had your shop? I don't know. Sorry.
I've been in charge of the shop now for a year and a half. We took over the shop We bought the business a year and a half ago, but I've been working in the shop for about 12, 13 years now. So
Yeah.
I've seen things come and go, and it's really interesting. I think the other kind of angles I'd take there are really the kind of shop space you've got, and the arguments say that the BA are putting out alongside to try and convince the government that the bookshops have this benefit to the high street.
Yeah.
Because it comes down to where your shop is. I'm very lucky that the shop we run has been running since 1887 in pretty much the same location.
Yeah.
And it's the location that holds everything as the key. But you're
Yeah.
looking around and trying to think, where could a potential shop start? And I feel like there's a tandem of just not managing to find the right commercial premises, and government policy not set up to recognize that they should therefore be allowed some recognition that says this is an important community resource as much as anything else. We want it to be an enticing, discoverable space. And I wonder whether some of that direction can come from, some of that kind of lobbying of government for a different angle on awareness of books and publishing.
I sort of think it depends. I don't want to criticize governments, but I sort of don't feel this is a government that's particularly literary or cultured. I mean, Keir Starmer was interviewed and couldn't name his favourite author, could he, or his favourite book or something? And most of us would, probably come up with all sorts of things. But we've definitely had, if only we had somebody like Obama who would be putting out book recommendations all the time or whatever, and then they would understand that. But I don't think they understand the cultural value of bookshops. And I know the BA has been trying to get that. I mean, I sort of think, bookshops should have all sorts of grants and things because of their cultural importance. And I do get the impression that both the French and German governments in particular are better at that. And when I was at Blackwell's the other night, there was a lady from Germany and she was talking about that. And obviously Germany's still got a net book agreement and it's got hundreds more bookshops than we have per head of population. It's really, really strong. And that does come from the top, really. And so that's just one aspect. I mean, I don't think that takes away from the fact that it's difficult to get people into bookshops or difficult to get people into books, if you like, if that's not their habit. I mean, we all know, us and everybody we know, we're not the problem for books. It's finding the people who aren't reading at the moment, who aren't that, and the people who aren't coming into your shop, for example, and how do we attract those? And that, I think answers on a postcard, really. But yeah, it's fascinating to see, and I think you're obviously in a very good tourist spot, and that will keep generating that sort of in perpetuity, if you like. And there are definitely, certain shops in more affluent places. I was in Bath recently, and it's got the right sort of level of tourism and people with money living there to support several good bookshops. But there are definitely towns across the country where bookshops struggle, just like lots of other shops struggle, because it's not such an affluent area. So all of those factors, I think, come into play, if you like.
I wonder if we ought to set the discussion in a broader context, almost an anthropological context.
Yeah.
Lots of economists now talk about the attention culture, don't they? That actually everything is competing for small chunks of people's attention. And you might argue that the overproduction of books is one of the ways that a literary culture can at least try and participate, though one has to say books have always been overproduced. The quantities don't match demand. But if it is the case that the web has been so successful and social media has been so successful because it can capture that 5 or 10 minute slot that people are prepared to give it, then it does seem to me that anything that requires more concentration and a longer period and peace and quiet, such as reading a significantly long book, is acutely threatened by the technology we are confronting with, and no doubt will not go away. And I don't want to be too gloomy, but I think that the things will distinguish the small cluster of people who are interested in sustaining book culture is that capacity to concentrate, that capacity not to offer a small token of attention for 5 minutes, but actually devote days to something or other and be able to concentrate. And everything in our culture is moving in the opposite direction. It is distraction.
If I was going to be optimistic, I would say that I think things go in waves, and the reverse could be true in 10, 20 years. That's me trying to be optimistic. And I think, I share your concern, and I think I'm optimistic generally, and I'm optimistic in the short term. But I think, generations growing up who are accessing their information through a phone or a tablet or something like that, who are used to hopping around, getting a little bit of information here, a little bit there, a YouTube clip, a social media clip, reading a Substack article or bit of it or something, but not reading long form fiction or non-fiction. And there was that Jonathan Bate, the Shakespeare scholar, saying about his students, that years ago he would say to them, right, this week, these are the 3 books you're reading. And now he said, I'm lucky if they read 1 book in 3 weeks. And he was talking about, Chunky Dickens or Middlemarch or something else. And so there's absolutely, the problem is there. And you're right. I'm concerned that, people will people actually read what we call a book in the future, rather than just bits of this and bits of that, and might buy a short story or, probably not even buy it or whatever. But equally, so my daughter, who's 27, she was telling me that, she's got friends of hers who are actually making concerted efforts to leave their phone in the other room and challenging themselves to, let's all read War and Peace, or let's all do this, and actually trying to get back that habit. And I think there are people trying to do that. So I think things could change if we're optimistic, but you would definitely, we're up against it, because there are, as Martin Latham was saying, I think, the death of the book has been predicted time and again, as every, radio, cinema, TV, video, as everything's come along, the internet, the latest one. I think this looks more serious. I think, what you're suggesting, but equally, how can we change that? And I think, I don't know. You and I sound a little bit pessimistic about whether we can change that. I don't know.
I'm going to come to Sam in a second. I just want to suggest, and Simon's right about the attention economy that's really controlling so much. But to me, bigger than that is the convenience economy. And one of the biggest threats, we talk about the 15 minutes here and 10 minutes there, but my kids will watch 3 hours of TV, one episode after the other, and it's a long slog of just watching something, being conveniently being entertained and informed and whatever. The audiobooks are becoming really popular now, which is the most convenient way to consume a book.
Yeah.
And to me, this is one of the, more than the attention economy, I think the convenience thing is having a really powerful effect.
That's a really good point. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, like you say, if we're worried about people reading audio books, just like ebooks are a very good thing, because it it won't help Will's bookshop to sell all those. And there are various people like bookshop.org, I think, and others who you can get a small percentage if you're buying through them, which is good, because a lot of those sales don't go through bookshops. But absolutely, I think, and I do believe audiobooks have helped people read in all sorts. Somebody was talking on the radio about this a few months ago, that you can jog and listen to a book at the same time. You can be at the gym and listen to a book. You can't easily read a book and do those things. But
there's also the thing about the physicality of a book versus the non-physicality of what's in the book.
Yeah,
and I know a lot of bookshops in recent past years have sold fewer and fewer books and more posters and paraphernalia, things that can go on a wall, because in the house you don't have a bookshelf. In your apartment these days, you often don't have bookshelves, but you can have a wall that you can put the poster up on. So they're shifting what they're looking for within the cultural milieu of the bookstore itself, I think.
Yeah. But I sort of think you've got to be open to doing all those things, really. And if you can interest people in the subject in any way, whether that is getting people reading romantasy books because they've seen it on TikTok and all those sorts of things, whatever it takes. So, you know, and again, Martin Latham in his book, in that he talks about his first chapter of his book is all about comfort reads. And, you know, I think sometimes some of us are a bit snobby about the sort of books people read, and we all read what might be called rubbish at some point or other, and that's absolutely fine because it's better than not reading. So, and however people access those things, I think. But I do come back to this thing. I think, you know, maybe things go in cycles, and, you know, reading longer things may become more fashionable in 10, 20 years time. You know, I mean, certainly if you look back to, I mean, throughout the 19th century, obviously novels were these huge triple deckers and everything. You know, everybody was writing 700-800 page books, and then it all went down to, you know, 200-page books, and that's sort of become the norm, apart from sort of the 70s and 80s with the big American novel and you know, all of that, and it's come back to sort of slightly smaller again. So I do think, you know, perhaps things changed, but I think we are facing a more difficult challenge, and probably, you know, those of us who love books and want to see people still reading books, I think it is more challenging.
I think Evan's point about convenience is a very good one, but it does worry me that convenience tends to be passive. The interesting thing is, if you watch a television program, either at great length, or you listen to something, you are not actually constructing it. You're just getting someone's version of it. The point of reading is that you have to work hard at it, and you have to use your imagination quite extensively. So it's better than nothing, but it's not what one thinks of as the particular quality.
But somehow I think we have to then sell that. I mean, I talk about this a little bit in the book. I would, you know, argue that the experience of reading a book is better than watching a film. Exactly what you're saying. Watching a TV program or a film is very passive. To get the most out of a book, you're giving something. Your imagination is working. You are adding, and, you know, a book is sort of, you know, a joint effort between you and the author. The author's just written this thing, but the thing comes alive when you plug into it, if you like. But it's so much more rewarding because of that, because you are creating the images in your head and all that sort of thing. Somehow we've got to try and sell that to the people who are thinking, you know, it's much easier to binge watch whatever Netflix is offering or whatever. So
it's striking when they are celebrating Jane Austen, and newspaper after newspaper and website after website were discussing Jane Austen's novels, but not the novels. It was television and film adaptations.
It was Colin Firth instead.
That's right. So it's not. It's a sort of secondary process. People are, on the whole, as excited by, probably more excited by, than the novels which they may not have read.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. My possible take on that would be that at least they're talking about them, and it may lead some people to read them. You know, and I'm sure, you know, the Colin Firth adaptation led more people to read Pride and Prejudice. There's definitely going to be people who will just watch the TV series or whatever, but it puts them a bit more into the consciousness. And obviously we've lived with that for a long time. Both Dickens and Austen, I would say, probably is the way we read those is slightly skewed by TV and film adaptations, etc., which is not necessarily good, but at least it does bring. I think it brings some people to the book. You have to hope.
Just time for Will and then Sam.
I just wanted to interject and wondered whether actually, I mean, we were talking about this earlier. It's quite horrible now to find that online searches, even Amazon itself, it's actually very hard to find the book you want now, as sponsorship and corporate kind of promotion intervenes. And I wonder whether actually there's a kind of uniqueness now in going into bookshops, because they can help you navigate what was meant to be democratic is becoming hard to navigate, and what now retains in bookshop spaces is know how to navigate and find the thing that people are after.
I would like to hope that that's true, actually. And I think what I was sort of, you know, referencing in that talk was that I think there does seem to be in the last few years people turn their back on online a bit and going into physical books. Just from my point of view, and I shouldn't tell you these things, but I know that as a publisher this year, I mean, sales are not great this year. I think it's very tough out there at the moment for all sorts of other reasons, economy, etc. But actually, Amazon sales are quite significantly down, and I've talked to other publishers who saying similar things, and whether that is, people just don't like Jeff Bezos anymore, or turning against, anti-American things or whatever. But I sort of hope and think perhaps there is, a number of people who are just thinking, I'd rather buy that from a bookshop. And again, what you're doing and others doing a great job, but how else, we need to do more things to show that going in to a bookshop, that, this talking to booksellers, but the serendipitous discovery of books there. I sort of, and I make the point in the book, I think, yes, you can get recommendations from Amazon or search engines, and that's great if it's becoming more difficult to find things online. But it helps us. But I sort of think they're always, the suggestions on Amazon, for example, are always a bit too obvious, really. You go into a bookshop and I want to be surprised. I don't necessarily want to read a book just like the one I've read. I want something completely different. Next, please. Thank you. And, again, we were in Bath a few weeks ago. We went into Mr. B's, and, their whole ethos is we want you to discover new things and new authors, and we'd rather you didn't leave until we'd helped you discover different things. You won't get that from Amazon. It is that love of books sort of seeping out of the booksellers, and they say they don't want to be a pain, and if you don't want us to talk to you, we won't talk to you. But if you do, what you're interested in, let's try and find you something else. And it's like, you won't get that online, and somehow we need to bottle that and do it more. And I absolutely take my hat off to booksellers today. I think it's so much more difficult but different to when I was a bookseller. We had it very easy. Amazon didn't exist. Everything was sold at the same price. It's a different world these days, and you are competing against so many different things. But I actually think that's made booksellers up their game. You've had to be better and more interesting to be competitive. And it's, we've got wonderful bookshops. And again, I know it's not easy to make money out of it because the margins are so terrible. But we are very lucky in this country. We've got great independent bookshops. The US has great independent bookshops as well, but they've had to be good to survive in this current world. Anyway, sorry, I'm wittering on. I know, Sam, you wanted to say something else.
Well, I think you've led me back to actually this could be a nice wrap-up sort of comment, Evan, because we started off with talking about experiential bookshops, and Michael, you've just kind of alluded to that. I think in terms of circularity, I was thinking about Dickens. I mean, it's interesting because Dickens, of course, most of his novels started off serialized, so short bits. So talking about people with a deficit, and then they were made into these bigger 3-decker ones. So in some sense, we are just back in that same space where people were saying, well, now we want, we need to go back to it. But also my students are telling me, and if you look on social media, the physicality of the book is back right up there for these ones in terms of they all want the special editions with the sprayed edges, or they're painting their own sprayed edges, or I've just had a proposal in for Elements on this thing called fan binding. Have you seen video? Will might have seen these, where people rip the covers off of books and then, very carefully hand bind them themselves. So we're going back to Caxton again and these sort of traditional book arts. The next, so to me, this is what me trying to end on a positive note. I think the next generation, at least some of them, are very much engaged in the book and reading and the beauty of the book. And
that's good news. We've just got to make more good news, I think. Yes, but that is really positive. Yeah.
So thank you, Michael, for coming and giving us so much to think about. And even the title Shelf Life could be layer upon layer unwrapped. So could we all thank Michael in the traditional way by either putting the react button up or just clapping loudly? Thank you so much, Michael. I will stop the recording.